Okay. So I start, right? Okay. So my team and I are here to discuss a matter that is very important to all of us, the need to adapt to climate change rather than concentrating only on mitigation methods. I will discuss the reasoning for this viewpoint in this introduction, emphasizing the need for adaptation measures given the state of our changing climate. There is no denying that human activity is mostly to blame for climate change, which has serious and far-reaching effects. Among the many issues we face are rising global temperatures, harsh weather, rising sea levels, and ecosystem changes. Although the goal of mitigation measures is to minimize future climate change by reducing or preventing the emission of greenhouse gases, the effects of climate change are now apparent and have an influence on the communities all around the world. First, a change in emphasis toward adaptation is necessary given time-based need. It frequently takes years, if not decades, for mitigation methods to have a noticeable impact on emissions reductions. Communities are currently coping with the direct effects of climate change. A more practical and prompt solution is provided by adaptation measures, which entail making adjustments to the effects of climate change, both now and in the future. By adapting, we may strengthen the resilience of vulnerable areas, protecting livelihoods and lowering the direct hazards that individuals must deal with. Furthermore, it is critical to accept that despite the most vigorous mitigation measures, this sorry, some degree of climate change is now inevitable. A few modifications have already taken place because of the Earth's climate change stability. As a result, accepting adaptation turns into a practical strategy, acknowledging the necessity of adjusting to circumstances that are beyond our control. This dual approach of adaptation and mitigation can offer a more thorough and practical foundation for dealing with the intricacies of climate change. The unequal distribution of climate impacts around the world is another important factor to take into account. The immediate effects of climate change are most severe for vulnerable communities who are frequently found in low-income nations. These communities frequently lack the infrastructure and resources needed to put effective mitigation measures in place. Setting adaptation as a top priority guarantees that the disproportionate effects of marginalized communities are addressed, promoting fairness and justice in our response to climate change. Moreover, mutual advantages from adaptation strategies may surpass simply increased climate resilience. Investing in sustainable agriculture practices, for example, not only helps farmers adapt to shifting weather patterns, but it also supports biodiversity conservation and food security. In a similar vein, constructing climate resilient infrastructure advances long term development objectives and improves the community capacity to endure extreme occurrences. Through the inclusion of adaptation in larger sustainable programs, we may build more resilient and comprehensive societies. In conclusion, acknowledging the pressing reality we confront and the necessity of adapting to climate change do not imply giving up on mitigation measures. It is an appeal to give priority to measures to deal with the pressing issues brought on by climate change, especially for the most disadvantaged populations. Our response to complex and interconnected problems of our day can be more comprehensive and successful if we embrace adaptation in addition to mitigation. Let's take advantage of this chance to create a strong and sustainable future for future generations as well as for ourselves. And that's all I have.
Okay, I have a few questions. Why is it so important? Why is the short run so important than the long run?
Wait, so Olivia, I'm answering these questions, correct? Okay. I believe it's important because climate change is just happening at such a fast rate right now where we can't just rely on trying to mitigate it into where it's too late. We need to start adapting to it soon enough.
Okay, and then my next question is, how are you gonna get all the money for this new infrastructure?
Well, we have a lot of funds through like our country that we can definitely like take some out and like distribute it better. And I mean like even mitigating it is arguably going to take the same amount of cost or even more. So, I mean, that's a problem for both sides.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Mm, Okay. So hi, good afternoon. Today, me and my team will be arguing why the US should not prioritize adaptation to climate change. So, making our world like a worse place by producing overwhelming infrastructures and changes to the world is simply just not okay. And there's other like effective ways to help the planet. So moving to like my first point, it's like impact on vulnerable communities. So the Environmental Protection Agency notes that low income communities and communities of color and disproportionately affected by climate change faces higher exposure to environmental hazards and less access to resources of adaptation. And so without mitigation efforts, these communities will continue to bear the burden of climate related disasters. Um, so, like, the impact of climate change affects everyone and constrain like many aspects of our lives, including like our health. So, um, I think that we need to like depend on other like adaptable resources. And then moving to my next point, it's about agricultural challenges. So the US Department of Agriculture highlights that climate change disrupts agricultural patterns, leading to reduced crops, yields, and increased food insecurities. For example, in 2020, extreme weather events caused significant loss for farmers across the country, with estimated crop damage totaling $43 billion. So prioritizing adaptation without mitigation would further strain agricultural resilience. So changing in like ozone or like greenhouse gases and climate change affects like the agricultural like production. And as temperature changes, it can cause like habit ranges and crop planting dates to shift, and droughts and floods can happen and cause like and can hinder like farmers practice. And then moving to my last point is economic impact. So according to the National Climate Assessment, the annual cost of damage from climate change in the US could reach hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century. um in total, extreme weather events cost about $150 billion per year due to the direct impact, such as infrastructure damage, worker injuries, and agricultural loss, as the author of reports and as estimated. And then, um, sorry. So go in conclusion, like the impact on vulnerable communities, agricultural challenges, and economic impact are all um, big effects in in climate change. So I feel like we need to work on prioritizing that and helping that first before we get into changing in like the short run. So I think all these statistics undermine the imperative future for the US to take decisive action to mitigation greenhouse gas emissions. And so adaptation and mitigation efforts are both necessary components, and the consequences of neglecting climate actions are needed and at a far reaching impact, not only in the US, but the entire planet. So I think embracing the fight against climate change isn't merely an option, but it's important for the US to fulfill its moral obligation and secure a sustainable future for generations to come. Thank you.
And then I think Mohammed is doing the cross-examination for that one.
Oh, okay, my bad. Um, okay. So my first question is mitigation achievable in the time given with the rate of climate change that's happening?
I think yes, it's definitely possible. I think we just all need to figure out like the right resources and the right way to approach it. But I think we need to focus on like the long run, because if we keep focusing on the short run, like we're not gonna like advance, I feel like.
Okay. And given the reliance on technological innovations for climate change, how can we prevent the creation of new environmental problems or unintended consequences resulting from the production and disposal of these technologies? Like through what you're, sorry, through what you're like, so there's going to be a lot of, experiments and testing. So how are you going to respond to all like the failures? Like, what are you going to do with all those? Like, are you given enough time for that?
Um, I don't uh I mean, I don't really know what to say. Can you
Okay.
repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah. So just like here, I'll just shorten it up because it's kind of a long question. But I'm just saying, like, so you're gonna obviously go through tests, and you don't know exactly what to do to mitigate climate change. So through all these tests of, trying different experiments and going through all these things, do you think you'll have enough time? Like, do you think you'll find the solution really quick, or do you think it'd be too late?
That's a great question. I think that like I think we'll have time. I think we just still need to find like once we find the right solution, then like we'll obviously like we're not obviously gonna fix it all in like a year or so, but I think everything takes time. So I think that like over time we'll develop something that gets better and better each year. So I think the long run is like way more important than the short run, because everything is changing still. So it's kind of like hard to like have something like so set that like it can't change, if that makes sense. Sorry that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So my last question, I guess, is due to it taking time, would we need to adapt to it in the short run, adapt to climate change in the short run until we find the solution?
Sorry, can you say it one more time?
Yeah. So if it would take years to find a way to mitigate climate change, would we need to adapt to it now? Would that help us?
I feel like I mean, yes and no. Like, I think there's definitely needs to be a solution now, but a solution that's like always changing. Because, like I said before, like we're like the planet's always changing, so we always like we need to like keep up to date on each thing that we do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I'm going to be the second affirmative speaker today. Sorry, I'm just gonna set my timer. All right. Like what my teammate said, prioritizing adaptation to climate change is the most responsible and effective way to protect our future. Without adapting, we cannot realistically believe that we will be able to cope with the drastic changes that will occur within our environment. So without adapting our agricultural systems and resources, we cannot hope to economically survive. The true answer is to change how we live in order to survive as a species and to improve our quality of life to go on indefinitely. We cannot even hope to fight climate change in the first place unless we change the way we currently live, because the way that we live in our consumption habits are what started climate change in the first place. So we want to focus on immediate changes that will also benefit us long term. So today I will be discussing how our agricultural systems must be adapted, our consumption habits must be changed, and how our economic system will thrive with these new transitions. So I'm just going to start off with how our agricultural systems must be adapted. So Pradeep Krishlaya, sorry, who is the director and executive coordinator at UNDP, published an article on the site Open Knowledge Respiratory Beta, which cited the vulnerability with which our agricultural systems has when it comes to climate change. And this article specifically cites other countries with less resources, developing countries, kind of like what you guys cited as well, and how they are very much affected by the effects of climate change. They also mentioned that tropical regions are especially affected, which is interesting because I took an environmental management class last quarter, which talked about how the US imports a lot of biodiversity benefits. So for example, we grow a lot of our food in tropical regions, like especially near the Amazon rainforest. So it's important that we protect our agriculture in those systems. So I came up with 5 main ways to solve the issue and adapt to climate change. So according to the article, could agricultural systems be adapted to climate change? They gave 2 suggestions. The first one was creating genotypes in plants that would survive fluctuating temperatures and drastic changes in the environment. This means genetically modifying plants to adapt to climate change. The second one is changing our cropping patterns, which would be helpful in ensuring economic survival and food security. And this could mean just staying away from monocultures, using more regenerative farming techniques, stuff like that. The last 3 ways are things that I just came from my own knowledge and research. So there's vertical farming techniques that help conserve water and space, and they're also grown in a closed environment, which would allow those plants to survive climate change. There's also hydroponics, which is along the same lines of vertical farming in terms of conserving water and space. And then the third one is urban farms, which basically means that we're growing food closer to urban environments. We don't have to transport it. So along with agriculture, we must also change the way we use and consume resources to adapt to our changing climate. We're actually already moving in a direction of adapting to climate change with our resource use. According to the United Nations conference in Rio, their chapter 4 states that, quote, special attention should be paid to the demand for natural resources generated by unsustainable consumption and to the efficient use of those resources consistent with the goal of minimizing depletion and reducing pollution, end quote. So that basically means we must change how we use our resources to fall in alignment with our goals of minimizing depletion and reducing pollution. Also, Maria Sandberg, who represents the Hanken School of Economics, published a journal on the site Science Direct, which states that there must be 4 types of consumption changes ranging throughout the topics of housing, nutrition, mobility, and miscellaneous consumption when it comes to adapting. So the first one, housing, we could adapt our housing to be more energy and space efficient. Second one is nutrition. That could just mean adapting our agriculture, saving more food. Third one is mobility, and we could adapt to that by using less cars, less fossil fuels, making more walkable cities. And then the fourth and last one is miscellaneous consumption. So we could just buy less new items and invest in fixing old items and making them last longer. Additionally, it makes more sense from a financial point of view to adapt to climate change instead of trying to fight it. So this is where the economics comes in. So according to the journal, Economic Principles for Integrating Adaptation to Climate Change into Fiscal Policy says, quote, cost-benefit analysis complemented by the analysis of adaptation programs, as well as other development programs to promote an efficient and just transition to a changed climate, unquote. So this basically just means that it makes more economical sense in the long run to adapt our infrastructure and systems to climate change. With fighting climate change, you run the risk of needing to always fix up your infrastructure every time a drastic weather event happens. So if we go the adaptation route and just change our infrastructure in the first place to be more sustainable, last longer for severe weather events, we could spend a lot less time and money in the long run, which is better for the economy. And we're already kind of moving in the direction of that anyway, so it makes more economical sense to just continue on that path. So the financial investment of adaptation will help countries around the world succeed in surviving the effects of climate change, which also includes developing countries. And the demand for a strong economy is too strong to ignore, and the risk of fighting climate change is too uncertain. So without properly adapting our agricultural and resource systems in an economically feasible way, we cannot hope to survive climate change. We are already moving in the direction of adapting to climate change with building more sustainable infrastructure and preparing our systems for a harsher world. We cannot hope to make any difference with fighting climate change until we come to terms with the fact that we must first adapt our lifestyle to climate change. Fighting means that we are taking a gamble with our time, money, and resources for a potential future that may not be realistic. Adaptation is the only way to ensure that we can continue to live the life we currently know. Thank you.
Okay. I have a few questions. Don't know if they're good questions, but okay. First one, you mentioned fixing agriculture and like altering plants so that it's like so it like withstands like the climate and whatnot. What was the question? One thing I wanted to point out was that even if these plants like withstand climate and whatnot, climate change and how everything's going on right now, it's polluting the atmosphere, polluting like the soil. So even if we do alter the plants to adapt, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, I don't know how to word it, but
Yeah, I kind of see what you're getting at. Like, there's already a lot of issues with like soil runoff, which is kind of stripping nutrients from the soil, and then also pollution in the atmosphere where like it rains and it's like the acid rain, and then that's like not very good for the plants. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I would say to that, we can genetically modify plants to also use less nutrients. In terms of the pollution in the atmosphere, we could create preventative measures to protect the plants, whether that means making more coverings, being more mindful about where we do our farming practices, since more areas are affected by pollution compared to others. But yeah, I think the largest issue with pollution is from the soil and the water that gets into the plants and what the plants use. But for that, we would just need to use preventative measures and using preventative measures.
Okay. And then one last question. You mentioned like, just like, how would you prioritize adaptation since there's like so many facets you need to fix? There's like rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and like, as you mentioned, agricultural patterns. Which one would you like prioritize, or like how would you prioritize it?
A good question. I think first I would prioritize our agricultural systems. We are incredibly dependent on those. Like less than 1% of the population is actually in the food industry, and yet it supports all of us. So I'd prioritize that first. That's the most risky thing. The second thing I would prioritize is our infrastructure and adapting that. So that means creating more space and energy efficient housing. It would be putting up seawalls. It would be improving even our energy as well, because we're incredibly dependent on that. So making sure we're switching over to renewables and to more energy that's sustainable and away from fossil fuels. I'd probably do that. First agriculture and then infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start my part now. Okay. The US should prioritize fighting climate change over adaptation. So what is climate change? Well, according to the United Nations climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Such shifts can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. And what contributes to climate change? Well, the answer is quite obvious: humans. Everything we use, everything we build, and everything we eat all contributes to climate change. The United Nations also states that human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. The main greenhouse gases that are causing climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. These come from using gasoline for driving a car or coal for heating a building. This shows that almost little to no energy that we consume are clean energies. Climate change is a hot topic these days, and it's not just because of rising temperatures. We often hear about adapting to the changes it brings, but is that enough? Shouldn't we be putting more effort into stopping climate change in the first place? Today, I'm going to talk about why we should prioritize fighting climate change rather than dealing with climate change. In this discussion, we'll explore why it's crucial to focus on fighting climate change rather than just dealing with its aftermath. The first component would be social justice. In 2019, the richest 1% were responsible for 16% of global carbon emissions, the same as the emissions of the poorest 66% of humanity, which is roughly 5 billion people. This is a quote from an article called Climate Equality, A Planet for the 99%, written by Oxfam in November 2023. In this article, they largely talk about how the rich get to live such lavish lives by emitting excess amounts of carbon. Their short trip on their private jet can produce more oxygen than the average person emits all year. This data just shows how unconcerned they are for our Earth. With their private jets, they don't just take a trip a year. They're likely to take many trips a month, which adds up in the end and creates more carbon emissions. If we adapt to climate change, we are simply allowing the rich to make more and more unnecessary carbon emissions, while we, the other 99%, have to work towards their doings and adapt. If we limit their ability to use a private jet or even tax the rich, we are able to move towards fighting climate change. Oxfam states, a tax of 60% on the incomes of the super rich 1% of earners globally would cut the carbon equivalent of more than the total emissions of the UK and raise 6.4 trillion US dollars to fund renewable energy and a transition away from fossil fuels. This data just shows how taxing the rich would have a big impact on the carbon emissions, as it cuts out the carbon equivalent of a whole country. And this excess tax can also be used towards funding renewable energy, which will move us away from the traditional fossil fuels. Adaptation is not a very good solution when facing climate change because it's simply just not efficient. In the document called Before the Flood by National Geographic, they show us part of the world who tried adapting to climate change: Miami Beach, Florida. Miami Beach had a problem called sunny day flooding, where it would be a beautiful sunny day in Florida, but water would arise from the pipes and drains, causing Miami Beach to start flooding. In order to combat this, the mayor, Philip Levine, tried to prevent flooding by integrating pumps into their city and raising roads that were compacted by the flood. This whole project was a $400 million project that was largely funded by raising taxes. But when Levine was asked about how long this would prevent flooding, he said that it would only last 40 to 50 years, and after that, they would have to come up with a new solution. This alone is just not efficient, as you would have to rebuild and rebuild after every 50-something years, and this process just gets more and more expensive. Ultimately, at some point, there's a limit where you just cannot build on top of the roads anymore. In conclusion, as we embark on this exploration of the urgent need to combat climate change, it is evident that the Earth is undergoing long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. While natural factors contribute to these shifts, the primary driver of the current climate crisis is undeniably human activities. The United Nations emphasizes that our choices in what we use, build, and consume, particularly our reliance on fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, are major contributors to the increase in greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane. This reality underscores the gravity of the situation. Almost every aspect of our lives is entwined with practices that accelerate climate change. While adaptation is essential, it addresses the symptoms but not the root cause. We find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the choices we make can shape the future of our planet. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I'll be doing your cross-examination. So you mentioned that like wealthy people create more carbon emissions, and most of those wealthy people are probably from the US, I imagine. Is that okay? I just want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah.
And because of that, do you think that the US has a responsibility, since we create more carbon emissions, to provide like money and resources to developing countries who are more affected by climate change, even though they didn't create as many emissions?
Yeah. I'd say we do. I think by also like taxing the rich, we'd also have like extra funds in order to help these third nation countries. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Like kind of redistribute the wealth some more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my second question is in regards to the Miami flooding.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that it would be like the system of the pumping would need to be replaced in about, I think it was like 50 years. And the alternative to not having the pumping would be that the city gets flooded every time they have the sunny flood days. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, wouldn't you think it would be better to spend more time and energy to create better technology for adaptations? Since the flooding is going to happen anyway, and if the systems we have now need to be replaced in 50 years, wouldn't it make more sense to just have better technology so that we can decrease the effects of climate change,
Mhm.
even because it's still going to happen anyway?
Yeah. Well, from my research, it's just like something that Florida tried, and I guess it's working as of now. And it's just like they tried, or they have these pumps in their city, and it's working now, but like over time they're gonna have to replace it, and after replacing, it's just gonna get more and more expensive, and it doesn't really fight the root cause. Whereas if we just like tackle the root cause, in 40 to 50 years, they probably won't have to replace it anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then my last question, actually, you kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but do you have an estimate for how long you think throughout your research it would take for us to fix climate change? At least to the point of no weather patterns.
How long? I don't remember like reading anything about that.
Mhm.
If I did, I think it was something like if we need to reach net zero carbon emissions first, and then these like changes will start going into effect, and that will like take around, not too sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Mhm.
All right, that concludes my cross-examination. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I think, okay, I might have mixed it up. It's the affirmative preparation time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So what we did before was, at least in previous ones, like for the preparation time, like whichever team we would be on, we would take our earbuds off so that like the people can prepare. So if you guys are chilled with doing that too, that'd be great. And then we could take ours out when you guys prepare. Yeah. All right. And we'll text in the chat when we're all done.
Wait, sorry, what was that again? Like we do what?
Since we're gonna prepare a little bit for our rebuttal, if you guys can turn down your volume or take your
Oh
headphones
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll do the same for you once it's your guys' preparation time. Okay, so thank you. Okay, perfect. So kind of like last time, I did do a little bit of prep. So I can just quickly read you what I have so far.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, for the agricultural, I'm just gonna kind of restate what we already said, that adaptions would help ensure that we have food security. And then the other side mentioned that they mentioned agriculture as well and how we need to fix climate change in order to keep food security. What I'm gonna try to argue is that we need to adapt anyway because our agricultural system is not sustainable anyway. Like we already lose a lot of food and like crop cycles, and a lot of it goes to food waste.
Hmm.
So we kind of need to adapt anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And then for resource use, I'm just going to basically argue that our consumption is the reason why we have climate change in the first place. So we need to adapt that, like just in general, even before we can even think about fighting climate change, we need to change the way we consume. So we got to adapt by doing that. And then for economy, they mentioned a lot about the economy as well. So I'm just going to say with adaptions, we can basically protect our economy. It's cheaper in the long term. We already have policies that reduce costs if people cut back on their fossil fuel emissions. I also wanted to mention that they talked about developing countries as well. And if we have climate adaptations, we can integrate that in developing countries so that those countries don't even have to deal with like fossil fuels or any of the stuff that we had to go through.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also the
Yeah.
cost, like they said,
Mhm.
it costs too much money, but like mitigating it would cost even more money.
Yes, that is true. Actually, you know, I'll put that.
Yeah,
Um,
that part didn't make sense on their end.
yeah. Also along those lines, I could talk about the risk of adapting, or sorry, mitigating, because it's like you're not sure if it would work or not. Like,
Hmm.
at least in the stuff that I've researched, even if we did like cut back all of our emissions now, there's still the risk that extreme weather events will happen
Hmm.
like for a long time before it kind of catches up and then things calm down.
Yeah, and there's no
So
like we don't have a definite like solution built,
yeah,
so we don't know yet like if it'll work.
yeah, I could say that. No definite solution. It's a bit of a gamble. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I can focus on those. All right, and then yeah, that sounds great.
Okay,
Perfect. That's
perfect.
all I had for economy. Did you want to add anything else for resource use or agriculture?
Honestly, it all sounds good.
Okay,
So yeah,
done. All right, slay. All right,
perfect.
thank you, architects. Real quick. Hopefully that one is, oh, oops. Okay, perfect. Thank you all for muting while we, or not listening while we did our prep. All right, so I am gonna do the rebuttal. So I wanted to start with, as we have stated, we cannot hope to survive without adapting to the already prevalent issues of climate change. We're already seeing the effects even today. So immediate action is very necessary. If we do not adapt, there's no realistic way we can continue to prioritize our current lifestyle. So one of the most immediate issues that comes up when thinking about climate change is our agricultural vulnerability. So in order to have food security, we must adapt our agricultural systems. Like I mentioned before, our agricultural systems are the most at risk for being damaged due to climate change. And this is just because they're in open areas and they're very much affected by weather patterns and temperatures and drought. So adaptations would ensure that we keep food security. You guys also mentioned that the agricultural aspects that we need to fight climate change in order to make sure that we have consistent crops, we have food security. But I would also like to argue that even nowadays, we are already seeing risk for losing whole crop cycles, and we're already seeing a bunch of food waste, like or maybe it's like a third of all food grown is just being tossed or thrown in compost and not used. So even if climate change wasn't an issue, we should still adapt our agricultural systems to be more efficient. With climate change, it's even more important that we adapt it. So along the same lines of sustainable agriculture, we also must change our consumption habits to be more sustainable. I wanted to mention that it's our consumption habits, which are the original reason that we have climate change. It's because we use fossil fuels. It's because we overconsume, we buy things that are maybe not as necessary as other things. So we just need to change our consumption habits. We also have to make sure that we aren't taking as much resources from natural ecosystems and instead adapting our resources to come from our own places. For example, instead of taking lumber from natural forests and using that to build stuff, we should instead grow our own trees like in Washington State. They just have these logging forests that are for the sole reason of our consumption. So making adaptations like that would be better for our environment and for our own survival. So with both of these strategies, we can confirm that we will have a successful future. My third point is our economy will be safe from any risks posed by climate change if we adapt. So with adaptations, we safeguard any potential threats that would affect the economy with climate change. And that could be things like natural weather events that could destroy infrastructure. It could mean weather events that prevent people from going into work. You guys also mentioned that infrastructure damages could occur and also harms to the public health. And I agree with that. And I would say those can be solved by adaptation, making sure that people stay safe, making sure that our infrastructure is sustainable and can work with climate events. I also wanted to mention that adaptation strategies will help developing countries. You guys mentioned developing countries and how they would be affected by climate change. And I wanted to say that adaptations could allow those countries to skip the whole hassle of working with fossil fuels, running into the same issues that we're running into, and allow them a big boost up in terms of their development and making sure they can survive weather events and climate change. And then the last thing I wanted to mention with the economy is it costs more in the long run to mitigate versus adapting. We wanted to also highlight the fact that with mitigating, it's more of a gamble. We don't know if we're past the point of no return. We could be spending a ton of money and time and research to mitigating climate change, and then it turns out that we're already too far gone. So it makes sense to adapt. With mitigation, there's also no definitive solution. We have theories of what could work, but there's no set in stone thing that like, oh, if we do this, then climate change will go away. So with these in mind, we can ensure that we continue to live at the same health level and comfortability level, but with the peace in mind that it is sustainable, and that can be done through adaptations. By adapting to climate change through agriculture, consumption, and the economy, we ensure that our immediate and future lives will be protected. Climate change is something that will impact the lives of everybody in this debate and everybody who's watching. As young adults, we will see sea levels rise, extreme weather events, lack of reliable energy, and potentially food insecurity if we do not implement our adaptations now. With adaptations, we can promise not only a reliable future, but a better one than the option we have now. Thank you. And then I can take out my earbuds for
Yeah,
you guys' preparation time.
for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so just text in the chat when you guys are all ready,
Okay.
or put like a thumbs
All right, it's time to cook.
All right. What are we
Okay.
thinking?
So, all right, my preparation for this is so different than what everyone else has been talking about, and I feel like that's actually a good thing because I'm actually going to be talking about population control, giving and like giving rights to indigenous communities. That's kind of crazy. I know that's like not really like conventional, but I think that like they low-key are like low-key really essential when it comes to mitigating because like I have like this website or like this fact here about how like basically like population, the more that grows, the more like climate change will get worse. So like kind of like what she was saying just now about how like um there's no like solution for it. Like we don't know like what
Yeah.
to do, like that'll change it. I guess that's
Uh-huh.
like that's actual like factual like evidence on like we've seen that like those two kind of go together. So if we can kind of like reverse that or like go down and like kind of do some more population control, then we can like literally
Yeah.
make that less extreme on us in the future. Um, I don't know how to counter the whole too far beyond repair thing because that is like literally we probably are. So
Yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna be able to I don't think I'll be able to like counter that. So whatever. And then as for the indigenous people thing, I guess that they're like I guess they are in control of. Hold on one second. Let me pull up the evidence. I was reading an article and they were saying how like we don't give them the full rights. Like we know about the whole like injustice in like indigenous communities, but we don't give them the full like rights of their land. But they've been able to do more good to their land, like and for nature and like the climate change than we have like with the land that we take from them. So I guess like the whole point of it is just kind of like giving them like the more recognition and like credit and like rights that they deserve because they have like more like I guess like knowledge or they're able to carry out like more climate like friendly climate change like behaviors and actions than we do because we're very urban and very far beyond like just rural I don't know
Yeah. I took like
practices.
the indigenous class here and they like talked about that a lot. So
Yeah. I don't know. I think those are just like like when it comes to adaptation, like those don't have anything to do with adaptation. So like that's why I think they're good points. But what do you guys think I should add? I think I should talk about something else besides those two.
um
I need more. Actually, I do need you guys' help when it comes to the whole sustainability stuff. I didn't take a lot. So if you guys want to like
let me see.
Sustainability?
Hmm?
No, nothing.
Yeah, like I pretty much just did a quote, which I'm gonna read out and then move on.
Hmm.
Mm, we could talk about
Yeah, when it's so hard. Dude, mitigation sucks. I hate this. I hate defending mitigation.
I think our final prompt is mitigation.
Dude, like, are we not allowed to adapt? Like, I hate that we can't, like, part of it. We can't even give credit to the other side. Like, we have to, like, fully be,
Mm.
yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, there are times where I'm like, yeah, you're right. But, like, no, like, we can't say that. All right.
Mm,
Should I just go for it? I think it's fine. Honestly, I don't want
yeah,
to
I
take it
think it's
longer
fine
than
too. I don't think you need to go in about like sustainability because
I think the whole population and indigenous mitigation strategies are fair enough just because like I said, like when it comes to adaptation, they can't really counter that. Those are kind of like
yeah.
impossible
Yeah.
to adapt. When it comes to population, what are you supposed to do? Like what do you do? I don't know. Like that's doesn't really yeah, doesn't really relate. Okay.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
You got this.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. So it's my turn. I'll be doing my rebuttal for the mitigation slash negative stance here. I'm gonna try my best to not read off my my notes here, but I don't know, I did take a lot of notes. Um, so yeah, I'm defending mitigation today. I think that when it comes to the argument of are we too far beyond repair, like can we go back? You know, I don't think that's exactly possible, but I did gather evidence when I was researching on things that show proof basically of what is causing such an extreme like spike in climate change. And I think that's like kind of already a given anyway, but a more unconventional route I went with is like population. I think that like when it comes to adaptation, you can't really like adapting to population is going to get really tough because according to the research, there's about like 80 million people basically being added to the population every year. That's like really great because taking into perspective, some context, the world had a total population of 770 million people in 1760 when the Industrial Revolution started, which is kind of like when climate change basically started taking its kind of course because that's when we started having like these machinery and factories started creating like greenhouse gases and basically just changing the whole, like health of our planet just started basically decreasing from that point on. So when you think about that, 770 million people and then 80 million people being added every year is pretty insane. So, and then it started hitting the billions in the 1800s, and then fast forward to the 5 or 6 billions in the 1980s and 1990s. And now, of course, we're at 8 billion people. So I think like a different route I went with when it comes to mitigation, I think is kind of just like focusing also not just on sustainability and going just green and all this recycling, everything you hear, everything I look up when it comes to mitigation is very cookie cutter and the same. So I think it really is important to take into account that like population like matters. And I'll read a quote here from somebody from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They stated, quote, as well as driving emissions, population growth is also important because it affects on the Earth's ability to withstand climate change and absorb emissions, such as through deforestation, as land is converted for agricultural use to feed a growing human population, end quote. So yeah, in order to fix this or at least create some kind of like reasonable solution, I think the only thing we can really do is like push education even further. I know that's kind of like really kind of far of a reach when it comes to like third world countries because that's basically been like they've been trying for as long as we can remember to push education, but it's not really feasible and realistic for them. Again, being a third world country, but that's kind of like the whole point is to, with the Paris Agreement, I know they're kind of really trying to push like the whole like less the carbon emissions, but they're already having like a global agreement anyway. So I think like when it comes to that, they could also push just like that worldwide effort to just push education, like I said. And I think someone said earlier about how like they should the United States also should take accountability on helping other countries as well. I think that's actually fair. That could also be a really big part of how we could push that education to lessen population. Because like I said, population in the future, if it keeps continuing to grow, adapting or mitigating is going to be really hard. I think like at this point, like starting that now and as soon as possible, and then seeing like what that outcome could be in the future could really be huge. It could really be a big impact. And then I actually did move on to sustainability as well. I thought it was important, at least for some kind of argument. I didn't want to go full unconventional. But I said from the quote, this is according to the GEF, this is another website I researched from. They said, quote, building on the GEF's longstanding track record of driving innovation and fostering enabling conditions, the strategy also aims to promoting private sector engagement and increase investment in low carbon technologies and nature-based solutions with high mitigation potential. This is done by combining technical assistance and investments to pilot innovative business models, financial mechanisms, supportive policies, regulations, strategies, etc. I don't want to go too far into that. End quote. It is pretty expensive what we're hearing, like all these ideas that they have in mind, which is kind of like a problem when it comes to mitigating. But again, I just think like as of now, like it's on a more okay. Let me take a moment here for a second. Yeah, I guess to kind of echo a lot of the ideas we've said before, push the idea of using nature-based forms of solutions, up the use of recycling and clean renewable energy, and then also on a more personal and local level, maybe collect rain as well, create reliable streams and irrigation systems, lessen poverty. That's kind of another one. I didn't go too deep into that either. Okay. I'm kind of treating this like another point, by the way. I didn't really gather a lot of I couldn't follow along like on a lot of points you guys said earlier, so I'm kind of just using the research that I got. That's okay. And then for my last point, I did another a pretty I don't know, different route again. And it's so I'm going more like an indigenous route, I think. Like when it comes to indigenous people, I think like what I've gathered from research is they were able to do a lot of good for climate, like for the climate and nature, and obviously nothing bad for climate change because they were like doing their practices that they usually do, but they don't have a lot of recognition and rights that they deserve. Again, like we're a country that has taken so much land from them. So I think like seeing like the effect and like impact they've had on like their own lands, and how good that's been for the world is just really important. And I think that like that should translate over to giving them their rights. I have a quote here again. This is from the World Resources Institute. They quoted, indigenous and local communities manage about almost 50% of land on the planet. 50%, which up to 2.5 billion people depend on for their livelihoods. These communities have practiced adaptation principles on their lands over generations, developing a deep body of traditional knowledge that can help others understand how to adapt to a changing environment. Yeah, so I know this is adaptation, but I think also from another article, it's just saying that like indigenous people protect forests on a like hold 1/4 of all carbon in tropical forests, which is saying a lot for not having full rights, holding less than 1/5 of those lands. They deserve the credit and resources or that they deserve, and given more time, use these resources that they technically own. So I think again, like when it comes to mitigation, I think it's kind of like similar to population that like we should just start shifting more of a emphasis on that as well. Just because like when it comes to adaptation, there's nothing really to like we this is kind of just like a more political thing as well, just because or I don't know what you would want to call that, but oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with this. There's not really like much to like work with when it comes to adaptation because there's already like the damage has already been done for them. So I think like seeing like the good they've done for the planet, and like how much land they own, like I said, 50% of land, 2.5 billion people on the world like are affected by this. Giving them like a lot of their power and like rights that they deserve could really show some progress. Because like it doesn't like, I think earlier as well, it was stated that a lot of the trial and error basically of the ideas and experiments that we're using to mitigate, like having to fix that or bounce back from that could be like damaging. I think like that indigenous people and the communities who are doing such good to this world are like not even involved with that. So, giving them that time and all that space is basically just like almost they're just doing what they usually do. This is getting really crazy, but I just think that like taking this route, I think it's also important to focus on that as well. So, okay. That's it. I hope that was convincing, but yeah.
Yeah.
Was there
Oh,
any
that's
last
perfect.
things to do?
Nope.
No?
Let's see, I could stop the recording real quick. Perfect. No, that was